Hi, my name's Nancy Harrod, and we're going to look at my art today. I do primarily collages with painted papers. I'll give you a little bit of my past and how I ended up here talking with you about this art. Back when I was a kid in Ohio, I went to the Red Barn Art School in summers. And I remember my first bit of art criticism. The girl across from me had very bright red hair, and I had more muted red hair. And we were supposed to paint portraits of each other. And I gave her the preferable, more muted red hair, and she gave me the very bright red hair. And we had quite a discussion. And that's when I first learned about the subjectivity of looking at art. I went on to be a designer, had worked with a big practice, traveled, multidisciplinary design on big teams for colleges and universities. Later had a small practice, and about 10 years ago started going to collage workshops in Cambridge with Alexandra Sheldon. And that's when I really realized how much fun it was to experiment with these papers and how effective it was to work with them in collage. So then I was teaching and was in studios teaching college students design, and then COVID struck. So I was suddenly teaching on Zoom, and I was up in Cambridge in what I called my garret making art. So the first art I was making, I was there alone having a conversation with the art. So after a while, I decided to do diptychs. And I did a whole series of diptychs. And this is one. And what was really terrific about working with these diptychs is that then the art could continue to have a conversation with each other. And you can see the things I'm experimenting with having to do with what stays in the boundaries, what goes outside the boundaries, and how the colors and shapes and forms all work with each other. And as time went on, I began exploring things where I went way beyond the boundary, and was there really a boundary at all? And you can see in this piece that there's a bit of a hint of a blanket or an anchor. And then the shapes are all dancing with each other as they move about the work. And what you're seeing is the work where the shapes themselves are interesting, but also then the negative space also becomes really interesting shapes. I also went through a stage, and then as one continues to work, we find it necessary to give ourselves challenges. So this challenge was, how few shapes can I use to still make a piece with good content and that's interesting? So again, it's about getting as much movement, flying on and off the page, and working with just a few shapes. So as I continue to work with these shapes, I've also had the luxury now of being in this larger space in Great Barrington than my small garret in Cambridge. And so the pieces are getting larger. And again, I'm working with the positive and negative space. And I also say that because I'm now out in the Berkshires, everything turns into a landscape. So this wasn't initially intentionally a landscape, but as I started to work, it turned into that landscape. And I had just been visiting my mother in Arizona, and you can see that whole thing coming through. So in much of the work, as I'm working, I start out with all these ideas brewing in my mind of what I'm thinking about, and then they come through into the work. This piece is much of the same in that this was done during the time that we were seeing all the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. And so as I began working, the air was smoky, and the whole piece is dealing with all the issues that we're dealing with about climate change. Here we're continuing that theme of climate change, and I call this dancing at the edge of the apocalypse. So we have that kind of post-apocalyptic background, but then we are still managing to dance, and the shapes are dancing with each other. And I really enjoy that challenge of making two-dimensional pieces really show movement in my work. People ask me who are my major influences, and they're often painters. Many painters dabbled in collage, maybe early or late in their careers. Some did amazing work in collage. Matisse, for example, the whole end of his career. But the influences I've been most enjoying have been painters. The first is Richard Diebenkorn, and his work is all about place. Most of it deals with landscapes in California. There are a couple wonderful quotes from him. Reality has to be digested. It has to be transmuted by paint. It has to be given a twist of some kind. All paintings start out of a mood, out of a relationship with things or people, out of a complete impression. So when I see this, I see the fields in California, and I think his color palettes are amazing. Another painter that I am absolutely in love with is Joan Mitchell, one of the abstract expressionists. And her work was all about thinking about landscapes. These are huge paintings. This painting is in 4 panels. And I have a couple of great quotes from her as well. And I really find it enriches my work to see the work and read about other much more impressive painters. Joan said, "My paintings are titled after they are finished. I paint from remembered landscapes that I carry with me and remembered feelings of them, which of course are transformed." And the final painter who I've been really enjoying is very much alive and well. Her name is Amy Sillman, and she does series of paintings. It's almost as if she's getting ready for animation. These are huge drawings that are clipped on a laundry line in a museum. She says, all accidents and experiments and discoveries are what my work is about. The problem I have as an artist is being way too critical. The huge problem with abstract painting is, when am I done? You're done when you don't want to do it anymore, which I think is wonderful. She's well worth, you can see her lectures on YouTube. And she's an amazing academic and painter. As I continue to work, I get more and more involved in working on techniques to make these really interesting papers that I call my ingredients for a collage. And people ask me how I work. And often I am creating a painted background, and then I'm assembling a range of papers that I have that contribute to the palette, that contribute to what I'm thinking about. for that particular work. And I was talking with a friend who's a poet, and I said, sometimes I have this all gathered and I feel like I spend the entire afternoon just moving papers around. And he was saying, yes, that's how a poet works, that you're spending the entire day moving around words and phrases and sentences. So some days I do that, sleep on it, go back into the studio the next day, and then it's all quite clear what to do. And there are a couple of things. I love this effect because to me it really looks like the white birch bark that we have here and in New England. And it's this technique, which sounds crazy. I've painted paper, and then it's a way of applying Elmer's glue with acrylic paint over, and as it dries, it forms these really interesting patterns. And so this was done last fall here in the Berkshires, and it really, I think, speaks to what autumn is here. And here we are again in the autumn. One of the ways that I create the papers that I use is I started painting on the New York Times. It was during COVID, and it was all about what you expose and what you conceal about the news. Of course, during COVID, we wanted to conceal just about everything in the news. But newspaper isn't that great a surface until you've applied acrylic or gouache paint to it. And then it has a lovely hand. It's very smooth and soft. And you can see in these pieces that this is on New York Times, and it gives it this great kind of texture. And in some of the works, you can even see a headline bleed through, and that's intentional because it supports what's going on in the work. This is a piece that I did that is actually one of my favorites. And it's really dealing with all of these interlocking forms that creates the center of the piece. And then we have these tangential flying pieces that are essentially splinters coming in and out to make sure that there's enough movement. And that's been a great way of working. One of the things that was good that came out of COVID is that different artists got together either with a leader or self-led groups, and we'd get together on Zoom and talk about what we were working on, and maybe even have an exercise that we'd do at the same time, all scattered around in our studios. And it was amazing camaraderie and collegiality. And I've been very lucky to have mentors like Alexandra Sheldon and Adria Arch and Johan Hahn, who I've had some wonderful crits with. And their leadership and support through workshops and crits and artist groups, art chats, we don't call them critiques, has really helped move the art along. And now I've joined the Guild of Berkshire Artists. And again, that's a great way of meeting other artists, talking about your art, and having that camaraderie so that you're not feeling that you're just working alone in your studio. And speaking of that, my studio is a lovely place to be, and I'm so glad that you were able to join me today. Again, I'm Nancy Harrod. My website's nancyharrod.com, and on Instagram, I'm at nkharrod. Thank you.